What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So this is the Samsung Galaxy A22, and after using it for a couple of months now, I think I've come to the conclusion that this is probably the best budget Samsung device offered this year, at least in my opinion. Now, I want to be clear that I'm talking about the regular A22, the 4G LTE model, not the 5G version of the phone. That device is different and actually a bit worse, but this regular A22 packs all the right features and all the right specs for the right price. Now, it's not a perfect phone by any means, and in fact, if you aren't specifically looking for a Samsung device, there are other brands out there with better devices than this one for the price. But for a Samsung-specific budget tier 2021 device, I think this is the one to get. Price-wise, this phone retails for about $250 right now, maybe a little more depending on where you get it. And depending on where in the world you live, it may or may not even be sold in your region, but those stipulations aside, that definitely puts this phone in the budget-friendly category. And if you are interested, I'll leave some links down below in the video description to where you can get this phone at its cheapest current prices. Just make sure it's available and will work properly wherever you are in the world. Because this phone is an A series device, Samsung's budget tier, it's of course going to have the usual compromises with the design and form factor that's associated with that distinction. However, I still think it's a pretty good looking phone with no major design flaws. Up front, you get a large 6.4-inch display, and actually with the other Samsung devices pushing 6.6 and even 6.7 inches, this A22 feels comfortable. I don't want to say small because it's really not, but I do think this is a perfect size for even one-handed use while still offering plenty of screen real estate. You have a U-shaped camera notch up top, noticeable chin across the bottom, but still an 84% screen to body ratio, and I don't have any real complaints. It's about what I expected. Around back, the A22 is made from the usual plastic material. That's basically all Samsung offers now, but this fit and finish is different from the matte plastic we often see nowadays. Instead, you get a shiny, glossy material here that's sort of similar to the A series of years past. And while I didn't mind it at first, I have noticed some light scratches come through now, and it's a losing battle with fingerprints and smudges. All in all, if I had the option, I would have preferred the matte plastic build you get on the other A series and S series phones over this, but it's not a huge deal. And one more thing to note, it shouldn't come as a surprise, but no wireless charging or waterproofing here. You do get some other hardware add-ons you might want though. You've got an SD card slot, which I think a lot of people will utilize. There's a headphone jack at the bottom still, just one single downward speaker, but it's plenty loud. And on the side, the power button doubles as a fingerprint sensor. This is the setup I personally prefer over an in-display reader, and in my experience, this thing has been lightning fast and totally flawless. I almost never see the lock screen when I pick this phone up, and that's exactly how I like it. Things are a tad slower with Face Unlock, but while I have that set up, I don't ever have to really utilize it. The fast fingerprint sensor is the way to go. So with all the basics out of the way, let's talk about a few things this phone does well. And the first is that it offers a really solid display. Now there's two pros and one con with the viewing experience, and I think you'll need to weigh the importance of each based on what you personally prefer. The A22 offers a Super AMOLED panel to start, which is great. It's bold, it's bright, it's really colorful, and this takes me back to the A series of a couple years ago that were crazy good values also with OLED displays. It's much of the same here again, and that can't really be said about some other 2021 A series phones. The display is also a high refresh rate 90Hz panel, so you get that fast, ultra responsive feel with everything you do on the phone. And nowadays, this is a feature I know I can't live without. These two features alone I really appreciate, but the kicker is that for the resolution, it's a 1600 by 720 display, packing in just 274 pixels per inch. It's not crazy high for a screen this big, but with that, I think you're gonna be able to tell that this is not the sharpest looking display. You can pick out all those pixels, especially with reading text on screen, and I think that's what's holding this back from being a perfect display setup. Like I said, you'll need to decide how those three things come into play with what you need for your viewing experience. For me, I can look past the lower resolution simply because the high refresh rate and AMOLED panel are what I personally prefer. I'm much happier with those two aspects versus forfeiting either one for a 1080p screen. Inside, this phone is powered by the MediaTek Helio G80 processor, and the choice of either 4 or 6 gigs of RAM. Mine has 6 gigs, and I do think that's the option you should go with too if you have the choice. With that combination, my experience using this phone has been surprisingly good, and I haven't found anything yet that this phone has had trouble doing. Here are the Geekbench scores for you to compare against some other devices if you want, but in real world use, this phone is not only great with the easy everyday stuff, but it can also game just fine too. Now there is one consideration here. You get Samsung's One UI Core, which means on the software side of things, there's some stuff you might notice missing. There's no Smart View, no knock security, no NFC either, but honestly, I've never been bothered by One UI Core limitations because it's not like anything too important is really missing. The user experience is the same overall, and for me personally, my day-to-day usage hasn't been impacted by the small limitations One UI Core has. Now, specifically for gaming and other more intense graphics-heavy stuff, I consider this MediaTek processor inside to be really quite good. It's a relatively new, sort of mid-level chipset, it's not even a year old, and in-game performance is solid, I'd say 95% of the time. The initial launch and load times for each app aren't too bad either, considering the price of this phone, and I chalk that up to going with 6 gigs of RAM as well. I've almost always considered that to be the sort of minimum threshold to really enjoy playing games and multitasking and quickly switching through all the apps that stay current. And for me, the performance on this phone with that combination of internals has been great. It's better than expected, and it's able to handle anything I throw at it. Also, the 5000 milliamp battery inside this thing pushes me past 15 or 16 hours of screen on time under normal usage with some gaming thrown in. For me, that's well above average, and that big battery could even last you 2 full days on a single charge if you're not a particularly heavy user. So that's great. Battery life is a big plus, and you've really got a device here that's in it for the long haul. The downside is that with just 15 watt max charging speeds, the phone is going to take more than 2 hours to fully charge from 0%, which isn't a big deal if you're doing it at night, but if you're on the go, you're kind of going to be stuck at a wall outlet for a while. I know it's one of the pitfalls of a phone at this price range. It's not a surprise, but at the same time, I think we're at a point now where even sub $300 phones should be offering faster, more powerful charging setups. So out of everything so far, that's probably the only slight negative with the overall performance and usage and internal specs. What probably surprised me most about this phone out of everything though is its camera capabilities. And in one sense, it shouldn't be too surprising because I know Samsung has put more effort into their cameras on these budget phones than probably anything else. But I can confidently say this phone does outshoot a lot of other $200 to $400 devices, like the OnePlus Nord N200 for example, and especially anything from Motorola. Hardware-wise, there's a 48 megapixel main lens, an 8 megapixel ultra-wide, 2 megapixel macro, and 2 megapixel depth sensor. You could argue that only 2 or 3 of those lenses are actually useful, but the setup is fine all in all. And the selfie camera is pretty solid too. It's a 13 megapixel shooter. Capability-wise, I think we're past the days of Samsung offering bare-bone basics with budget camera setups, so you'll find everything you need here and then some. There's night mode and slow-mo, hyperlapse, panorama, pro controls, and obviously macro for up-close pictures, not that I've ever used it. There's wide angle, portrait shots, and even OIS for videos, which is particularly nice. The downside is that you're maxed out at 1080 30 FPS for filming videos, which yeah is fine for most people, but a little better video capabilities would have been nice. In practice, the A22 produces really great shots, and there's a couple things in particular that stood out to me when I was shooting. Low light and night mode pictures were fantastic, and I'd almost prefer to shoot at night with this phone because some of those scenes look better than similar shots in broad daylight. Night mode has often been a struggle on budget devices, but that's just not the case at all here. The wide angle lens once again offers that darker look with lost shadows and less detail compared to the standard lens, but I've seen this so many times now on budget devices that I've come to expect it. I'm just glad the wide angle lens is here. And overall, this phone continues to offer the colorful, saturated, punchy sort of look that Samsung is basically known for. It's not a complaint or even a net positive, just something to mention and consider. And video-wise, I actually think the added OIS is a big plus here. Shaky, jittery videos are sort of what we expect on some budget devices, but that's not really the case here. You get a little bit of movement, but but it's pretty good compared to a lot of other similarly priced devices. Overall, this A22 honestly offers a lot for its picture and video capabilities. It certainly surprised me, and it's a prime example of Samsung's efforts really paying off when it comes to shooting on these budget-friendly devices. In using the A22 for the last couple of months, I pretty much realized that there's just not much to complain about at all with this phone. It's a good solid device with all the basics and then some, including stuff like the AMOLED 90Hz display and excellent camera setup that I think are particularly good for the price. The lower resolution on the display is probably the biggest downer on this phone, but if that's the only thing, you've still got a fantastic, affordable Samsung smartphone here, and it's the budget device I'd recommend right now if you're specifically looking at Samsung as your OEM of choice. So there you go, those are all my thoughts on the Samsung Galaxy A22 4G LTE. What do you guys think about this device? Is it something that you're considering buying right now? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.